Hello everyone! We have now finally seen what is Perturabo, the Demon Lord of Iron. This is both wonderful and nerve-wracking, as the Iron Warriors and Peturabo is by far my favorite legion and piece of 40k related lore to Space Marines and Chaos Space Marines. I initially was going to make this video into a rant raging against Games Workshop, as they, basically I'm looking at this and thinking, what have they done to my boy? But I will be giving myself a challenge and give my earnest attempt at creating an angle as to why Demon Primarch Perturabo would be cool and make sense, and at the same time I'm gonna use this as a chance to deep dive into his backstory and why to me he was the Imperium's greatest asset, and now that he has returned, that he is possibly the greatest threat except for maybe a united Necron or Orc faction. But before we go into anything like that, let's start with a bit of history. And where would be a better place to start than what would become the home of the 4th Legion, Olympia. Olympia was an enduring and rugged and tested world located in the marshes of the ultimate segmentum on the far side of the galactic core away from Terra. Its surface was dominated by vast chains of high peaks, deep valleys and jagged ridges, elevated plateaus, making large-scale urbanization and agriculture extremely difficult. This, along with the weather and fauna, confining human settlements to defensible high ground locations alongside valleys and lower mountain tops. The planet's geology providing an abundance of high quality materials for construction like sandstone, granite and other durable sorts of rock, which was ideally suited for elaborate fortifications, keeps, citadels, walls and much more that would come to define every single city and village on this planet. Rivers and water sources flowed freely from large snow-capped peaks with naturally melting glaciers, flowing through valleys where they could be dammed and controlled by those holding the highlands, and such a system created natural power imbalances and strategic choke point which life would often center around. Underground cave system and high passes further complicated travel and warfare, turning the landscape into a natural fortress network. Fertile areas were limited to verdant mountain valleys and sizable plateaus such as the Irikian highlands in the southern tropics and other rich vales, which became the focal point of endless rivalries amongst the city-states. Rain in such a place would be frequent in the mountains, often followed by low clouds turning to mist that would reef down cliffs into valleys, covering everything in a pale fog that would create days, even weeks of low visibility, making for a dangerous environment both due to the fauna but especially due to other humans. Strong mountain winds would whip through passes, carrying dust and grit during dry spells, and thunderstorms were very likely due to the dramatic elevation changes. Lightning flickering across deep blue heavens and dark grey clouds punctured by mountains. The weather would reinforce the independent and isolated nature of the planet, as during cold periods, just imagine entire passes and valleys covered in snow, basically isolating every village and making sure that every Olympian would have to be a fortress in their own right. For the average Olympian citizen, life was defined by the planet's unforgiving nature and constant low-level warfare and the need for self-reliance. Most people lived within or immediately around one of the hundreds of fortified cities built directly into the mountainsides or atop the defensible plateau like the self-proclaimed capital of Locus. Homes and workshops were carved from and constructed with the abundant local stone, forming seamless citadels that blended into the cliffs. Daily routines revolved around survival in a landscape where flat land was precious, and men and women might tend small terrace plots and valleys for harvesting grains, olives, and other hardy vegetables, while children and elders would herd livestock along precarious mountain paths, dodging thorny shrubbery and watching for rockfalls and predators. Water would be fetched from communal wells and cisterns fed by the highland rivers, with strict rationing during dry spells, and trade caravans would move extremely slowly through guarded passes, carrying stone, metalwork, weapons, and foodstuffs, but always under the threat of ambush by rival forces. Weather shaped the rhythm of life. Morning mist and rain-scented air after night storms meant muddy paths and swollen streams, forcing delays in herding or construction. Dry, dusty summers brought water shortages that would spark skirmishes, and a citizen might awake to the sound of distant thunder echoing off of peaks and then spend the day repairing fortification and forging tools in guild workshops, before having to retire back during the evening as mist would roll in and visibility would be so low that you don't know what is sneaking up on you. Life expectancy was actually pretty decent for a pre-industrial world, thanks to engineering knowledge and families living in tight-knit communities. And despite the harshness, there was a sort of pride in the idea of Olympian resilience. Citizens would take satisfaction in masterful work, philosophical debates in public squares, and the knowledge that the mountain homes were nearly impregnable. Basically, this is space Greece. The mountains were described as bladed and unforgiving, with sheer cliffs and extreme drops and rocky outcrops, and paths around these chains of mountains would be mainly hard-packed earth roads or rocky paths worn smooth by generations of herders and travelers, who would guard the knowledge of these things with jealousy. Travel between city-states required navigating guarded passes where control could mean life or death through tolls, ambushes, or blockades. A terrain like this would create a war that would favor siege warfare and attrition, as large armies would struggle to maneuver and small fortified positions could hold out practically indefinitely. Olympia was what in modern Imperium would be classified as a civilized world, characterized by a sophisticated feudal culture divided into hundreds of independent cities or polises, each ruled by a self-declared tyrant or maybe even an entire noble house. This structure echoes the Greco-Roman societies of our time, but with a darker and more brutal edge of constant rivalries, vendettas, and political intrigues over resources, mountain passes, and dominance. Why am I putting so much focus on this? What does rain and mountains have to do with the demon Primarch? It is because this would form Perturabo into the man he would eventually become, and as I will show you, will turn him into a man capable of making the choices that he does throughout the setting. Unlike many of his brothers, Perturabo does not remember much of his childhood, as his absolute earliest memories is of finding himself halfway up a sheer cliffs, rain slick with no idea of how he got there. The specific cliff in question are referred to as and I swear some of these names, but I'm really trying here, the Fergarian Cliffs, which was approaching the self-proclaimed capital of the planet Locus. Exhausted and cut by the climb, he finished the ascent alone despite being at the very limit of his physical body. In the stories of this time, it is told that he reached the summit and he would gaze upward and see a strange swirling star maelstrom in the heavens, a terrifying glowing rift in real space that, by being visible to him, filled him with dread of something which he would experience only a few times in his life: fear. No other person that he would speak with in his life would be aware of this constant presence in the sky, and as such he would only share this information a few times throughout his entire life, guarding this as a close secret. The presence of this maelstrom made him feel constantly judged and observed, even spied upon, fueling early on a temperament of not feeling adequate and constantly measured. There are many rumors and stories as to how long the Lord of Iron would spend wandering the mountains, as at this point he is more of a figure of myth and legend, only encountering people in remote rural regions among the harsh arid peaks or in the verdant valleys where he would hunt. Think of him as like a Hercules figure out of Greek legend, showing up when villages was plagued by monsters like the serpentine Olympia and other apex predators of the world. Side note, the Olympia is like a serpentine semi-hydra dragon thing. Despite these brief contacts, he remained aloof and transient. He trusted no one fully and formed no lasting bonds and would move on. His unearthly confidence, physical superiority, and intellectual dominance made him seem more than human to anyone who encountered him for more than a moment. One really interesting thing is that Perturabo would lay claim to during any debate that he would engage in about his natures, is that he would see himself, and these are his words, that he's a bolt of cloth weaved by another being, which is a really interesting take on Perturabo's intellect and his ability to analyze. Every Primarch is creating with an emphasis on certain aspects and even outright supernatural abilities, and here we actually see Perturabo's strongest ability, which is his intellect. But I mean intellect in a very specific way. His intellect is so sharp and so incredible fast that as Perturabo observes the world around him, he instantly understands what something is and how it pertains to something else, but only in a context of where he is and what he already knows. This might sound a little weird, but bear with me because it gets really interesting, and I will give some examples. Let's take Perturabo, wandering completely naked throughout the land, and he would feel hungry and look at a goat and instantly understand that in context to him, this thing is food, and as he slaughters this creature, he knows what to eat and what not to eat of it, and then while eating this creature, he finds fur, which he then immediately understands will keep him warm. Very simple, but let's take it up a notch. Perturabo, now wearing several goat hides for clothes, now wanders into a village and comes across an artisan's workshop, where he picks up a chisel, and now he instantly understands how to use this tool. Then he gets a hold of marble and immediately understands how to treat the material with the chisel in context, and in mere moments he is an expert mason. Now, at the very first time that he applies the chisel to the marble, he is not only a masterful mason, but he can now maximize what he can do with this particular piece of marble, since he views this thing along fracture lines and in such a detail that with his current knowledge and currently understanding, he can now maximize the output. See, this is a bit more advanced, but we can even take it up a notch where it becomes really, really interesting. Perturabo, wearing given clothes for his heroic deeds. Perturabo, given clothes for his heroic deeds of creating the best fortresses and iron weaponry possible by hand, has gotten access to the tyrant of low-cost libraries and workshops with engineering tools and books written by the greatest of experts in any given field. Suddenly, you have a Primarch that is refining everything that he comes across as he comes across it, meaning that he now understands architecture, agriculture, warfare, and everything else in context with what he already knows. This is the type of creature that should terrify anyone who understands that this process will continue forever, as Primarchs are biologically immortal and have perfect recall, which basically means that he will continue to grow smarter, he will continue to expand his knowledge and constantly be able to, in any given moment, to apply this knowledge to the situation. This, however, while might seem really powerful, and don't get me wrong, it is, it comes with a dual nature to it, and allow me to explain that this is bordering a bit more on speculation, but I believe that it holds water. I firmly believe that Perturabo is not capable of coming up with new information or conceptualizing ideas that are not directly linked to observation or logical correspondence between action and result. As we see in previous example and in most of his stories, he sees things as equations and data, and as such is a master of everything that is entailed within the equation. That is why he sees himself as a bolt of woven cloth wrought by another, and that he understands that his being is not natural and as such must be created. But he cannot accept the ideas of gods, demons, and spiritual concepts, as they are unseen and only exist in our spiritual context. They are basically built on ideas which are unseen, such as faith, soul, and much more. And therefore, if you take into account my theory, that also explains why Perturabo has such a hard time dealing with his own and other people's emotions, as they operate on a type of logic that is invisible to him, and as such they frustrate and infuriate him to a great degree. It is even seen often when Peturabo becomes angry, when one of these emotional puzzles eludes him due to this invisible logic. He becomes so angry that he kills and breaks everything around him, and that in of itself is because that he cannot control his emotions, as he does not understand their logic. So he's basically being gripped by something that he doesn't understand and is taken for a ride. His and other people's emotions are the only things that he actually gets to experience as a regular person, and after having lived a life with an intellect like his, this is alien to him. He is completely literate when it comes to oaths and promises, meaning that everything he says is something he fully believes and will do, so things like subterfuge in a social context will get the better of him, but subterfuge meant as a battle strategy, as part of an equation, makes complete sense to him. Anyways, tales of this incredible youth finally reached Damascus in the city-state of Locus. Guards were dispatched and found Peturabo climbing the mountains below Locus. Oh, I forgot. Damascus is the leader, king, and tyrant of the city of Locus. Specifically, he was climbing the, and I said the name before, and I will try to say it again, the Therian, the Pyrian, Perigian, whatever, cliffs that I mentioned earlier. They explained to him that the tyrant wanted to see him, and then they escorted him towards the city with no problem, as Perturabo was completely willing. He was brought before the tyrant shortly afterwards, who was interested in finding out whether or not this incredible large youth was as great as everyone believed. He was granted a test of artisan skill, where on a large mobile forge, Perturabo was given mundane and common tools to create, as the tyrant would put it, something magnificent, to which Perturabo would craft, just with a tongue and hammer, a blade of such quality that it was among the finest blades in the palace. The second test was that he was to use this weapon to fight against a famous champion called Orthrax, who on Olympia was considered one of the greatest amongst fighters. And even though Orthrax has much more experience and technique than Perturabo, he would end up overwhelmed and defeated, as not only was Perturabo physically mightier, but as I mentioned before, think of how Perturabo's mind works. With every single sword stroke, Perturabo would simply become better and better, refining and improving battle techniques that had taken the champion years to master in a few swings. But the boy did not kill the champion, which the tyrant found interesting. The last test was a long series of logical puzzles and philosophical conundrums, which Perturabo would solve faster and faster the more that was presented to him. The tyrant was satisfied, and a bargain was struck. Perturabo would be granted every single resource that the tyrant could provide him with: teachers, books, tools. However, Perturabo promised to use all that he would become to benefit the city of Locus, which the young boy accepted. Damascus immediately integrated him into the household as a part of his family, and just within a year, Peturabo had grown greatly in stature and capability, to such an extent that he and Damascus would often sit together in matching thrones inside of the great library, where they would spend significant time together. Damascus really did try to nurture Damocos really did nurture a deep pride and love for this boy, but a man like Damocos is a product of Olympia, and as such love would be shown a lot differently than we might think of it. Damocos would show off Perturabo, and it would come across like him showing off a prized possession more than a son. And Perturabo would for years enter a sort of regiment of vicarious solitary study where he would absorb Olympia's entire body of knowledge rather than spending time with his family. Science, philosophy, architecture, medicine, astronomy, and the way of warfare, quickly he would outpace the smartest men and women on the entire planet, and even in a short time after, he would start refining and improving basically every work that he was presented with. The only person that could ever pull him down to earth would be his adopted sister Caliphon, who even managed to get him to smile every once in a while. Every innovation would revolutionize Locus, and by that the broader Olympian culture, and Peturabo reshaped infrastructure and engineering, introducing advanced techniques that improve fortifications, industry, and daily life for every single person on the planet. However, everything he built was used by Damocos for warfare or dominance, and this slowly built a deep bitterness within Perturabo, who really just wanted recognition for creative and intellectual pursuits, rather than the wars that Damocos insisted was needed to unite the planet. And while Perturabo would perform these duties as a general and war engineer, he rejected Olympian customs, religion, and courtly falsehood in favor of pure logic, science, and reason. This made him contemptuous of the elite surrounding him, deepening his sense of otherness and strangeness. And as the years would go on, he would eventually become aloof, devious, cold, petulant, cynical, bitter, and untrusting, shaped by the world around him and the constant judgment and presence of the star Maelstrom. And you might at this point begin to see the shape of a man who would be capable of doing horrible things in the galaxy. But don't worry, it gets much, much worse. A new star appeared in the Olympian skies, the Emperor's flagship and the expiatory fleet, part of the expanding Great Crusade, and Perturabo recognized its significance immediately. Legends of rumors of this Golden King or Great Unifier from the stars had already reached the tyrants, but Peturabo alone understood that this was no ordinary conqueror. The Emperor's golden vessel descended, accompanied by custodian guards in towering Oromite armor. The Emperor met Perturabo on the mountain, the very mountain that he would climb by where he had gazed into the Maelstrom. Here, there was no prolonged test, no duel, no negotiation. Perturabo, towering and grim even then, looked upon the Emperor and knew that this was the one who had woven him, the designer that he had spoken of since boyhood. And the Emperor laid a hand on his shoulder, which at this point is an incredibly rare gesture of true parental recognition, at least from the point of Perturabo, and they spoke, confirming Perturabo's true nature as one of the Emperor's sons, crafted for the Great Crusade. And the Emperor, looking upon him, named him the Lord of Iron and declared him Primarch of the 4th Legion. Perturabo felt such a surge of vindication and purpose. The constant gaze of the Maelstrom finally made sense. Everything about him finally made sense. He was something greater. He submitted without hesitation or ceremony, offering his unbreaking fealty, much like what he had once done with Damocos, but now it was to his true father. The Emperor in turn revealed Perturabo's destiny to lead the Iron Warriors in the reconquest of the galaxy, breaking the galaxy's strongest fortifications as the Emperor's unbreakable hammer. For Perturabo, the reunion was both fulfilling, enlightening, and bittersweet. He had found his creator and purpose, yet the pattern would repeat itself, as the Emperor would teach Perturabo all that him and Mars was capable of. However, he must use it for the Great Crusade and the Imperium of Man. Peturabo did just this, and he threw himself into the Great Crusade with ruthless efficiency, leading the Iron Warriors in the most brutal siege warfare across the entire galaxy, succeeding in pushing war zones that had grown stagnant for years due to the utter resilience of the enemy. Here I must again hype the Lord of Iron, since this paragraph is often skimmed over. Listen, all Primarchs spend some time alone with the Emperor and are then taken to Mars to learn everything that they can to make war in accordance with their talents. Most Primarchs spend months or years on the Red Planet, but Perturabo would spend 2 weeks before it was deemed that the Red Planet could no longer teach him anything. That should terrify everybody. I have gone through a bit of the role of the Iron Warriors and their Primarch in the Great Crusade, and I will save the details for another video. But to sum it up, Perturabo kept being used as a hammer rather than being used for creative and intellectual pursuits, and then at the very end of the whole process would repeat itself when he swore yet another oath to Horus during the heresy. And I must point out here, Peturabo was not very hard to persuade into leaving the side of the Emperor because of all of this bitterness and resentment that has built up into such a hard knot within him. Horus basically swore to him that when the war was over, Peturabo got to draw amphitheaters and create infrastructure and be the engineer that he had always dreamt of. And here is another fact, and here's another tangent that I just have to go down on. Why would the Emperor look at Perturabo, this man that is so competent that he fixes everything that he's applied to, and not use him for something more than warfare? Well, to me that's really, really simple. If you had a hammer that could punch in every nail that your other hammers would have a hard time with, why wouldn't you keep using that hammer for that exact reason? And that's the exact same thing here. Right now, in this moment, the Emperor is not in need of anyone to do intellectual pursuits. He's in need of everybody to get the galaxy in order and fast. And so that is what Perturabo is being used for. So, but with all this in mind, just imagine what all of this might do to a man. You firmly apply yourself and trust those who are supposed to be trusted, and you keep being taken advantage of. But before this whole crescendo that this would resolve in, we are approaching a critical moment of when Perturabo's trust was truly broken, and that was during the pursuit of the Angel Exterminatus. After a particularly horrible and grinding siege war against their arch rivals, the Imperial Fists. Okay, side tangent. I am an Iron Warriors fanboy, but any day I will defend the Imperial Fist, as there's only one Space Marine Legion who can go toe to toe with the Iron Warriors, and that is the Imperial Fists. Anyways, Perturabo was having a rare moment of inner weakness. He is seen sketching his ideas for aqueducts and works of art meant for Olympia when Fulgrim, his radiant and theatrical brother, translates into the system. He offers Perturabo supreme command of a joint expedition into the Eye of Terror to claim a legendary weapon known as Angel Exterminatus, supposedly an ancient super weapon made by Xenos that could force the Emperor to surrender and end the war swiftly. Fulgrim flatters his brother relentlessly, and Perturabo, secretly desperate for any sort of affection or appreciation, seals the pact and agrees to the requests. Just to give you an idea of how vulnerable Perturabo is in this moment, considering the man that I've painted for you so far, he agrees to build Fulgrim a fantastical theater for the Primarch of the Emperor's Children to deliver his speech and briefing This is how desperate that Perturabo is for doing anything other than siege war. The armada plunges into the warp, guided by the enigmatic Eldari historian Karuchi Vora. Inside the eye, reality starts to fray. The Emperor's children, already on a downward spiral into the embrace of Slaanesh at this point, descends further into hedonism, pleasure cults, gene seed harvesting and mutation, while the Iron Warriors maintain rigid discipline and suppress any influence from the warp throughout the rigid philosophy of iron within and iron without. Fulgrim continues his charm offensives, painting this mission as Perturabo's chance to escape the ignominious siege duties that you always have to perform, and finally be recognized. And Perturabo, in his private thoughts and wargame simulations, reveal his true goal: not galactic annihilation, but the Emperor's surrender so the Imperium can be rebuilt under Horus. The dialogue between Fulgrim and Perturabo are mixed with lingering fraternity, with philosophical clashes, perfection versus pragmatism, art versus endurance, yet the undercurrent of manipulation from Fulgrim and the wish for something more from Perturabo grows stronger. The fleet finally reaches a planet called Idris, a dead Eldari mausoleum planet deep in the Eye of Terror. Psychic storms and terrible waves assault the invaders as if to repel and wane them off, but the Iron Warriors carve a beachhead through bolt of fire and willpower and drive towards the central sepulchral labyrinth with all of their might and precision. The Emperor's children are lagging behind, seemingly distracted by the ecstatic sensations of shattering any found soul's gem in this place. And Perturabo here begins to unravel Fulgrim's true intentions as he decides to execute the Eldari historian Karuchi Vora to thwart whatever hidden scheme that he suspects. And in the planet's core chamber, Fulgrim drops all pretense. The Angel Exterminatus was never a weapon, but a warp-fueled ritual. Fulgrim's true goal is apotheosis, to ascend and become a demon prince of Slaanesh. He reveals that the Makutar stone, a gift given earlier to Perturabo as a sign of their oath and cooperation for this mission, has been secretly draining the Iron Lord's life force for months. The intent of this ritual is to sacrifice Perturabo and fuel the transformation of the Phoenician. However, even in his lesser state, Perturabo is the Lord of Iron, and battle erupts. And the battle ends with Perturabo killing Fulgrim's mortal form. However, enough of the ritual has been completed, and Slaanesh chooses to ascend Fulgrim and removing all of the Emperor's children from the planet before they can be eradicated by the Iron Warriors. And here is the million-dollar question. And what does Perturabo do? He returns to the side of Horus and keeps carrying the entire traitor side of the war, now more bitter and alienated than before, yet dedicated to his oath, because, as I mentioned earlier, when Peturabo says that he does something, that is what he do. But there is a hidden side here, and that pertains to some of the powers that I mentioned earlier that Peturabo has. He has now observed the mechanisms of Ascension, and through that has been educated in the ways of warpcraft and the logic behind it, which would come in handy in my own theories later. I won't touch too much upon the Siege of Terra, as that deserves a dedicated video. However, needless to say, Peturabo continues to be an absolute champ right up until he finally snaps. His side is full of cornate berserkers, bucking noise marines, mutants and incoherent madmen, and at a pivotal moment Horus decides to berate him, and then Peturabo sees it all. He makes his final push through the greatest defense in mankind's history, but leaves afterwards, finally unable to stand the mistreatment hewn upon him for all of his ascension. And that is when, to me, we are entering the time where his ascension towards demonhood becomes relevant. I have to pay lip service to Games Workshop's side of the story of the ascension of the Lord of Iron. So, in accordance with Games Workshop, after the Battle of the Iron Cage, a true slaughter performed against the Imperial Fist. It is canon that in the battle's aftermath, Peturabo offered the captured gene seed of over 400 loyalist Astartes as a deliberate sacrifice to the ruinous power. This ritual and act is born of his fond understanding of warcraft, but not done with a fanatical worship, but cold pragmatism. A transaction for power, immortality, and a means to continue his endless war on his own terms. The Chaos God, usually never in true agreement about anything, agrees that giving him what he wants is a good idea, elevating him to the rank of Demon Prince of Chaos undivided. The transformation is complete, and Perturabo sheds his mortal form and becomes an internal being of the warp, still retaining his iron will and architectural genius, but now infused with demonic might. I have another idea and another take on the events of his ascension and reasons for it, so here we go. The Lord of Iron, weakened in body and soul after the echoes of Angel Exterminatus, has been since then forcing his body and mind to function. He has been feeling rust settle in his bones and a dullness to the blade of his mind. Yet, throughout the heresy and siege, he has been going on using what has always been his brilliance. Through armor augmentation and custom-built life support systems, he has slowly turned his logo suit into his own personal sarcophagus, never revealing to anyone what decrepit flesh lay beneath. But that is no longer enough. He feels it every day. He's slowly becoming less and less as he feels his soul continue to drain away from a wound that is unseen. But what if it can be solved? He turns his brilliance inward. This wound is just another puzzle to solve, and there, in his leaking soul, he finds his answer. The Iron Mandala is built, a vast, perfectly circular chamber sunk into the bedrock of the planet where he broke the Imperial Fists. His floor is a single sheet of black iron inscribed not with runes, but with fractal geometric proofs, hypercubes, Penrose tinglings, and logarithmic spirals etched by laser-precise servitors. These are mathematical expressions of siegecraft scaled to cosmic proportions, equations that models the stress fractures between real space and the immaterium, treating the warp as just another fortress to be breached and fortified against. And this time, he does it with none of his brothers. None. This is for him, by him. There is no prayer. No daemons are to be summoned or bargained with. The structure is pure logic and correspondence, an action and an effect. Perturabo stands at the equation throne in the middle of the mandala, unarmored for the first time in centuries. His mortal flesh is still grey, soft, and hollow for all that he has endured. He does not chant. Instead, he recites the Logos of Unmaking, a self-composed theorem that reduces the entire heresy, the Siege of Terror, and the Iron Cage to a single elegant proof. All empires fracture under calculated pressure. I am the pressure. And as he speaks, the gears of the throne begin to turn, powered not by Prometheum, but by the harvested gene seed itself. Servitors pump the vicious genetic slurry through iron pipes that spiral outward, feeding the mandala's fractal veins. The fluid grows faintly as the mechanism metabolizes it into raw potential energy of lives that would never be. The chamber screams as the warp, now compelled by hidden laws of the cosmos, responds and overlaps with the material world as it does on Moloch, and in a rare agreement, the Ruinous Four recognizes the transaction. 400 loyalist futures extinguished, a Primarch's pride broken on the altar of spite, and a vessel to further the grand game. Perturabo, the demon Primarch and Lord of Iron, now stand and is ready to plant his grand design. To me, Peturabo and the Iron Warriors would never accept any level of worship of the ruinous powers, and I fully believe that their bitterness and petty nature are so powerful that it would shield them from most of the folly that they saw within their Brethren Legion. So, a demonic Peturabo should be motivated by finally acting for himself and seeing demonic Ascension as a way to fix himself. The irony, of course, here should be that finally, when Perturabo would gain the freedom that he has been yearning for, now free to conduct in intellectual pursuits and improve worlds with his intellect, he cannot fathom doing anything other than stepping right back into the theater of war, and through his grand design bring war and ruin to those who never appreciated him. All while in the background, the laughter of thirsting gods would be heard. For who says that he managed to dominate them? Who says that what he demanded was not given freely? As they knew that for all of his potential, he would never be able to become anything other than an engine for war. After all, iron can be molded if treated correctly, and then it becomes unbending, unable to be anything than what it has been turned into. Thank you for listening, and I will be seeing you in the next video. Bye bye!